Morning, grade 11s, or whatever time you're viewing this at. We'll be looking at the booklet Complex Algebra number 2 and dealing with the issues that arrived from that booklet. So this is what we have in store for you today. Primarily we're looking at fractional or rational equations, and in the past I know you've done that in grade 10. I remember even teaching that to my grade 9s, and we looked at some kind of simple versions back then. But now we're going to start getting a little bit more complicated in how we proceed. And then at the end, we'll have a look at the word problems. So yeah, actually, you know what I might do? I might put the word problems onto another video. We'll see what kind of timeline we have here in getting through this particular lesson. Okay, so get out your notepads and get ready, because here we go. Alright, so let's have a look at an easy question that deals with algebra and fractions. And here we have x divided by 2 plus x divided by 3 equals 10. And of course we have to solve for x. So there's a couple ways to do this, and personally, as long as you're getting the answers right, then I don't have a problem with whatever way you decide to go. But if you want to be able to be successful in the later versions of these questions, then I'll show you my preferred method, and you can choose to do it that way or whatever. So part of the problem with this question is you've got these fractions to deal with over here, and they're not. That's nothing to sneeze at. They have some real implications. And if you remember about fractions, if you're adding fractions, you have to create a common denominator. And that's one way to go about dealing with this question. However, I want to approach it from a different point of view, where we want to try to cancel out the denominators of our fractions as early as possible in the process of solving this. So let's have a look and see how things go. My first job is to figure out a number that can be divided by 3 and by 2. Right? So if I think about that, that's 6. And what I want to do is I want to times the entire equation by 6. So it will cancel out the bottom part of the fraction, what we'll call the denominators. So let's see that. Okay, so as you can see, the lowest common multiple of the denominator, also called the lowest common denominator, is 6, and we're going to multiply 6 to all sides. Okay, I can show it by like that. You'll see how it plays out, and after a while, these formal steps of writing things down, you can always just dispense with after you get a feel for it. And that's ultimately my goal with these booklets that I give you, is to help you get a feel for these little steps that you can kind of discard along the way, help make your work more efficient. So I'm going to multiply both sides by the lowest common multiple of 6. What really happens is I backdoor bomb that 6 into both terms of the equation. Let's see what that looks like. Again, you can see how this writes itself out, and for many people they just go straight to this step without showing the other part, and that's totally fine. For a lot of people, after you get good at it, you'll go right to this next step, which is when I'm doing this is the step that I go to. Okay, so the 6 over here, right, the 6 over here cancels out with the 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, so I'm left with a 3x, which I just write 3x. Same thing over here, the 6 and the 3 cancel, leaving me with a 2, so I just write that as 2x. And then, of course, 6 times 10 is 60, okay, because we're multiplying by the lowest common denominator there. Now this is an easy peasy question, right? Grade 9s, grade 8s could do this. So now we finish it off, and the question is done, right? So let's finish it off and move on to something a little harder. Okay, so x is equal to 12. Now let's buff it up a little. Okay, so this is a little bit harder, but not really too much harder. The harder ones will occur when we start dealing with x's on the bottom of our fractions, and we're not there yet. So this one requires a little bit of creativity from the skills you already learned. Start off with the lowest common multiple of the denominator. So the lowest common denominator, what's that? It's 15, right? What can be divided by 5 and 3? And so I'm going to multiply both sides by 15. And this is a little bit tricky if people aren't paying attention to their rules about how to do that. Okay, so here I've multiplied by the 15, and this is what I would write. Usually though I don't show that when I do it for myself, and I'm fine if you don't want to either, but what happens here is that the denominators of both these fractions will cancel out. 15 can be divided by 5 and 15 can be divided by 3. So we show what the result is when we do that, and we just keep track of all the little odds and ends on the other side. So let's do our canceling, let's maybe gather some like terms, see what we get. Okay, so as you can see, right, the 15 and the 5 cancel out, leaving you with a 3, and then I got 3 times 2, which gets me 6x, which I just rubbed off with my finger there. So let me rewrite that in. Oops, that's a 6. Okay, and then over here, the 15 and the 3 cancel, so that leaves me with a 5, right? 15 divided by 3 is 5, and then I have to front or bomb that onto the x plus 2. And if you notice, up here I didn't have brackets on the x plus 2. But because I know that there's going to be this multiplying going to be happening up here, right, there's going to be front or bombing, I wrote the brackets in anyways. And that's not a bad step to take. It reminds you that you need a front or bomber. And then over here I just tidied things up, right? 15 times 2 is 30. Now this is an easy peasy question, so see if you can finish it up. Okay, so as you can see, here we go. I've got 40 on one side and 4x on the other side, so x is equal to 10, and there's the end of your solution. Okay, so this one is a little bit harder, and this is typical of the level I would expect you to be able to do on a unit test. And if you're thinking about trying to guess it, well, it's going to be a little hard. Actually, there's 2 answers that you'd need to be able to do. So it's not just one. You might be able to guess one, but probably not the other. And we use the same strategy as the easy examples, except now we multiply by x. That's the denominator. That's the lowest common denominator. There's only one denominator. So that's the one we multiply by. So we're going to multiply both sides by x. And let's see what happens. Okay, so I write it out like that. Of course, you can skip this step when you get really good at it because you'll start to be able to anticipate what the results will be, but this is the next slow step. Let's cancel out. Okay, so you see we have a quadratic equation. You know what that means. We have to make one side equal to 0 and then factor. Yep, got to do that here too. That's why we have 2 answers, because it turns out to be a quadratic equation. So let's see. Alright, so I move everything to one side. I try to keep the x squared positive. And so that equals 0, and then I factor, which I've done below, and now it's just a matter of figuring out what makes each of those brackets equal to 0. Okay, so there you go. X is equal to -1 and x is equal to +6. Now you might be asking about extraneous values, and there are some extraneous values in these types of questions, but they're very rare, and what you need to look for is whether the number that you get makes the bottom of the fraction equal to 0. That's the only thing you have to worry about. And in both these cases, right, -1, does that make the bottom of the fraction equal to 0? Nope. +6, does that make the bottom of the fraction equal to 0? Well, nope, it doesn't, so you're fine with your answers. You can check them on your own if you like. They do work themselves out. So there's a medium level question, and now let's look at a hard level question where you have to worry about extraneous values. Like I said, they're very rare, and I'm not super worried about you being able to do extraneous values for these questions, but let's look at an example anyways. Okay, so this one is right out of your work booklet. It's page 3, section 3, number 4. And this one winds up having an extraneous value. And if you spend a little bit of time meditating on this question, you could probably appreciate why that might be. But let's go through the proper process of, this job. So I have to think of the common denominator. And when you have multiple strange common denominators, or any kind of multiple common denominators, you can always just multiply them together. So let's see what I would use here. When in doubt, write it out, right? You've got these 2 bottom parts of your equations. They need to cancel out somehow. So my lowest common multiple over here right, that has to have both parts to it. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by this expression. You'll see what happens. Okay, so I write it out. It looks like this, and now I have to work at canceling things out. And it's easy to see how things cancel. Over here, the 2x minus 6 and the 2x minus 6, right, they cancel each other out. And then over here, the x minus 3 and the x minus 3, they cancel each other out. So those are easy enough to see, and we'll cancel those out. And then it's just a simple front door bomber question after that. Okay, so cancel those things out, and multiply the parts that are left over. Yeah, it's front door bomber and stuff like that. So let's solve it. Let's finish it all the way through to the end. And you'll see that the answer won't work. There's a bad answer and there's an extraneous value. So watch for it. Alright, so finishing off the work, right, I'm just going down. I'll end up getting 48 is equal to 16x, and you divide off the 16 like regular algebra, and you get x is equal to 3. And you're like, yeah, I got my answer, alright! No, you don't. The answer's wrong. And the reason why is because if you stick in 3 into that spot, I get 3 minus 3, which is 0. And over here, I get 2 times 3, which is 6. And 6 minus 6 is 0. In both cases, I have zeros on the bottom of our fraction. And we're not allowed to have zeros on the bottom of our fraction. Like, this goes right back to grade 4 when you go, thou shalt not divide by 0. Remember all that? And we've kind of looked at some of those details with graphs that have holes in them. They call them excluded value points. So, yeah. And so this answer is a bad answer. I'll show you what it looks like when I plug them in, and then we'll just make sure that we all know this is a bad answer. Okay. Alright, the check is over here. Right, I plugged in 3 for the slots for x, and I wind up getting 4 divided by 0 is equal to 24 divided by 0. And at first glance, that looks like that might be correct. But the fact that dividing by 0, is a priority over whether an undefined equals an undefined, we have to say that that's a bad answer. And it's a hugely technical detail. It's not something I would ask you to worry about on the test, but just to let you know that that's where the extraneous values lie. When you wind up getting an answer, it's a very quick check. Does it make the bottom of the fraction equal 0? No, the answer is good. Yes, the answer is bad. Okay, so that would be my harder type. Now I want to look at some of the questions in the booklet that require us to, use a little creativity. So I'll jump to those places where I need you to be a little savvy. Alright everybody, so page 2, section 1 and section 2 are linked. And I'll start off with question number 1, and we'll look at both parts of the question that are required to get you to do section 1 and section 2. So if you notice, I only got one denominator. I got x minus 1, so when I'm multiplying by the LCM, the lowest common multiple on the bottom, lowest common denominator, I'm just multiplying by x minus 1 to both sides. But you got to be careful because it creates a quadratic on the right-hand side. Yeah, on the right-hand side. So let's see how that works as I go through the cancellation part. Okay, so I write it out, times it to both sides. As you know, on the left-hand side, you're going to be canceling out the x minus 1. And on the right-hand side, you've got, you got that quadratic, that FOIL to do, which is not, it's not great, but anyways, that's what we got to do. So let's cancel out and let's do the FOIL. It's quadratic, so let's get a little bit of ways down the road on this. Okay, so it's just a matter of tidying things up, right? Cancel out, do the front door bomber over here, do the front door bomber on that side, work your way down, gathering like terms. It's a quadratic, right? So one side has to equal 0. Now what's the next step? Factor. Now you're going to see some hard factoring in this booklet. It's really one of the only places I can't avoid it. So what I'll do is after I finish with a couple of these questions, I'll do a separate little mini video on reminding you how to do some factoring on that. If you have a quadratic thing on your calculator, totally fine, right? If you want to use the quadratic formula, totally fine. But I'll do a little mini lesson that I'll attach to this booklet as well, so you can see how that plays out. So let's factor. This one's easy, and let's get our solution. Okay, so here's the factoring, and then there's our solution. So in section 1, over here, right, on the top of that page, section 1 winds up looking out to be letter B, and then because B is the second question, then number 2, which is, how that links up, winds up giving you the answers down below, which are 5 and -1 down here. So that's how you fill those details out for yourself. So this is kind of like, not too bad. Let's look at one more hard level question. I'll go through the factoring for that. It's, some of those factorings are pretty tough. So yeah, you have to get your skills up on that. Okay, so back to page 2, section 3 and section 4, and on the next page, page 3, section 1 and 2, they're all linked together. I like to do that sometimes to get you to do this job assembly line style. And so, we'll go through the sequence for each section as this works its way through. And then you can choose to do it assembly line style or do it question by question through each section, however you like. So, okay, start off with, I have to figure out my lowest common multiple. What am I going to multiply my equation by? And it has to be able to cancel out these two parts. So when they're complex like this, when they have fractions or when they have x's in them, then you just multiply them together in a single expression. Can you figure out what that is? Let's see. There it is up in the corner there. The lowest common multiple, what I'm going to multiply by is x times x plus 2. And a lot of people overthink this. And it's really where things go wrong. It's just the parts that need to cancel out, right? I need to cancel out those two parts. Then put those parts in the LCM. That's what I'm going to multiply by. So I'll write it out. We'll show the cancellations. So I guess this one works out to be what? What letter would that be? Letter D. I think letter D is the answer for that one. So let's multiply them out and see what cancels. Now probably some of you are starting to already see the patterns as you work through this, right? The x plus 2 is going to cancel out over here. The x is going to cancel out over there. And then over on this side, you're going to have both parts that stick around. So it'll be a quadratic, the x squared is part of that side. Okay, so let's work it out. Okay, so I've written the, the LCM on the board here. For any of you guys, you can pass that step. And the reason why I write these parts as over 1 is because I got a fraction that I'm canceling out on each part. If you go back in the video, every time I'm dealing with canceling out a fraction, I always write what I cancel out over 1. Now, it's not necessary. It just helps us remind us that we're dealing with fractions and how fractions cancel out. And like I said, for many of you, by the time you get to this part, you'll be doing this stuff automatically. So don't worry about writing it all out fancy. Okay, so after all the canceling and, gathering like terms and all that stuff, this is what I wind up getting on the bottom. And that would be letter A in section 4. So now it's my job to factor that. That's not so fun, because I got a leading coefficient of a 5x, and you have to make that happen. So I'll factor it here. I'll do the factoring for you, and then in the next video I'll give you a quick reminder about how to deal with those types of factoring. Alright, so that's how it factors. There's lots of different methods for that, so like I said, I'll give you a little tutorial in the next video. Alright, so we have to figure out what makes each of these brackets equal to 0. Over here, this one is easy. -1 writes the opposite. If you forget how to do these ones here with the leading coefficient, you can make this whole thing equal to 0 and then solve it. Or you can remember the trick. And the trick was you take the opposite of the constant, so positive 8, and then you divide it by the coefficient on the x. And that was just the pattern that you were asked to memorize. You don't have to do it like that. You can make this expression equal to 0 and solve it. You'll find out that you get that answer too. So if you follow the sequence of how the questions work in each section, so section 3 becomes letter C, section 4, number 1 is A, page 3, section 1 is letter C, and page 3, section 2 is letter A. Okay, so I think this will take us to the end of this video, and I'll have to pop off another one real soon. Okay, take care.